This is episode 51 of the 99 Forever podcast. I'm Eric Friesen, and joining me to recap the Edmonton Oilers' thrilling overtime win in Game 5 of the Battle of Alberta is a good friend of mine and the host of the Heavy Hockey podcast, Michael Hebert. Michael, how's it going tonight?
It's going great. Thanks for having me, Eric.
Yeah, thanks for being back on the show. Honestly, I couldn't be happier right now. I'm sure you're feeling the same way.
Well, I haven't slept much since. I'm pumped. It's pretty much all that's on my mind right now is bring on the Avs.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're obviously both huge Oilers fans, and after enduring years of losing, it just feels unbelievable that the Oilers are headed to the Western Conference Final for the first time in 16 years. And what makes it even sweeter is that they got there by beating their provincial rivals 4 straight times. Michael, that was easily the Oilers' biggest win since Game 6 of the 2006 Stanley Cup Final. But I want to know, where does this win over the Flames rank in your lifetime as an Oilers fan?
Well, there is, in my mind, there's nothing bigger than the Battle of Alberta outside of the Stanley Cup. So the Stanley Cup would be big, but the Battle of Alberta is second best to me. This is right up there in terms of wins. Although I'd have to say that there have been some pretty exciting Oilers wins in my history. 2006 had a couple of them back in the of course late 80s and early 90s that I vaguely remember. Nothing's as fresh. It's probably a little bit of recency bias in my memory to say last or 2 nights ago was the biggest ever, but it certainly felt great. I mean, as everybody who knows me knows, I've got 2 favorite teams, the Oilers and whoever's playing the Flames. And last night they were the same team, or 2 nights ago, and so this was huge.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm similar in a way. Like, when I first started watching hockey in the mid to late 90s, the Oilers gave us a few upsets over the Dallas Stars that were really, memorable moments for me as a kid. And obviously, the Oilers' run to the final in 2006 was magical. That team, I mean, they came within a game of winning the cup when they weren't even supposed to win a single game in the playoffs. I have so many great memories from that year. And even in 2017, they had some very memorable playoff victories as well. But for the Oilers to beat the Flames in the first playoff Battle of Alberta in more than 3 decades and advance to the conference final, that would have to be right near the top of my list, with Hemsky's goal to eliminate the Red Wings in 2006 and Pisani's shorthanded overtime winner against the Hurricanes in the final.
Yeah, I mean, the Pisani goal was pretty awesome, wasn't it? I mean,
it was, and Craig McTavish channeled his inner Glenn Sather there, turning around and signaling to the crowd in Carolina after that goal. I don't know if you remember that famous clip of Sather when Wayne Gretzky scored the shorthanded slapshot goal in Game 2 of the 1988 Smythe Division Final, and Sather turns around and sort of fist pumps to the Flames faithful at the Saddle Dome.
Yeah, no, and those moments, right, are pretty amazing, and that's maybe the hardest part that I have with adding this into that. Like, I don't know that there was there maybe McDavid's celebration? Was there something specifically iconic about the end of the game? Maybe it was McDavid's celebration. I mean, I've been saying this is the most genuine McDavid we've ever seen in a long time.
Well, as I kind of mentioned, yes, the celebration was awesome, but winning a game in overtime in your biggest rival's building, the fact that it was the best player scoring the goal, there are so many factors here. Plus, to win 4 straight games, I know it won't go down in the books as a sweep because the Flames won the first game, but I just think after not playing them for so many years, to finally have that moment where you go head to head and it was such a convincing victory, that is what's going to make this a victory that Oilers fans are going to remember forever.
Yeah, and you know what? There's there's the whole Flames aspect. There's the the controversial disallowed goal. There's a number of things to remember about the game that'll make it memorable. I love that it was in 5 games, right? I mean, it was outside of the first game, it was a sweep.
Yeah, I had Oilers in 7. I just felt that the way McDavid's been playing in the playoffs this year, he wasn't going to be denied, and that they would eventually come out on top. But I didn't think they'd get it done this quickly.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Totally agree with you. It was something else, wasn't it? I mean, I keep thinking about it, and I was trying to think. I mean, because you said it a couple times. This was the greatest. You thought would be the greatest win, and I have so many up there. The one that always comes to mind for me is when Edmonton came back in the Dallas series. They ended up winning in 7 games. If you remember, 97. I don't know if you'd remember that.
Yeah, that was the first year I started watching hockey, with Todd Marchant scoring the OT winner in Dallas.
Yeah, well, the one though that out of that series was Game 3, and Dallas was up 3-0 going into the third period.
And the Oilers scored 3 straight goals late in the third to send it to OT, and Kelly Buchberger ended up getting the overtime winner.
Yeah, and it was fantastic. And there's so many things I remember about that. The arena was empty.
Because I think a lot of people had, and I've heard, I've had another guest on the show who's talked about that too, and said the fans started just filing out after, there was about 5 minutes left in the game, and I think some people were trying to get back in, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, people were trying to get back in. We were watching it. I was in university at the time, and we were watching it at a house on campus in Edmonton. And a couple of our friends were at the game, and they showed up to all of us crowded around the TV, wondering what was going on. And we're saying, we're watching OT. And they were of course at the game. So yeah, it was like phenomenal they're just, hey, look, you know what this tells me is it's great to be an Oilers fan. That's about what it boils down to. Is it's great to be an Oilers fan. That there's a collection of great games, and this is just one of them. I mean, there's not many franchises in the league that have that many sort of iconic games in their history, and we did it just like this season. We did it with having, in the middle of all of that, a really crappy sort of time, right? And this season kind of mimics the whole Oilers history, if you will, having that November, December that we did in January.
This team was well accustomed to come from behind victories all season, and Game 5 was no different. And let's look back at Game 5 now. As I mentioned, the Oilers erased a 2-0 deficit in the second period thanks to goals from Darnell Nurse, Jesse Puljujarvi, and Zach Hyman that briefly put the Oilers in front 3-2. However, the Flames responded with a pair of quick goals to regain a 4-3 lead before Evan Bouchard scored to tie the game at 4 again, and that would hold up through regulation. And in the extra frame, Connor McDavid scored the overtime winner as the Oilers won the game 5-4 and the series 4-1 at the Scotiabank Saddledome. Michael, we couldn't have asked for a better ending to the Battle of Alberta than McDavid scoring the overtime winner, could we?
No, absolutely not. And I mean, I push this on to anybody. Was there anybody else you expected to score it? I mean, he comes up big, and he hadn't had a point the whole game. I just kind of, I felt there was never a point at which I felt unsure that the Oilers were going to come away with a victory. I just felt like it was going to be McDavid, and it was just a matter of when.
100%. I even tweeted during the intermission between the third period and overtime that this would be a perfect opportunity for McDavid to just have a legacy moment and score a huge goal to eliminate the Oilers' arch rival. And that's what ended up happening. And I mean, ever since he arrived in Edmonton in 2015, McDavid has always displayed a flair for the dramatic and a killer instinct in the biggest moments. And after being held off the score sheet all night, you just got the feeling that McDavid wasn't going to be denied an OT. And just over 5 minutes into overtime, Leon Draisaitl picks up the puck along the half wall. He spins around and got the puck right to McDavid, all alone just above the hash marks. And when the best player in the world has a little bit of open ice in the high slot, there's a good chance he's going to make you pay. And that's exactly what he did, going posting in for the biggest goal of his life. And the celebration after was iconic. He did the same celebration after scoring the insurance marker against the Kings in Game 7 too. And that picture should be a poster on every kid's wall in Edmonton for the next 10 years. I mean, it's one for the ages.
We're we're so fortunate to be able to watch him. And here's the thing about that goal that strikes me the most, though, is that's probably, I mean, it was a nice Connor McDavid goal, but going into this series, all we heard was how, Calgary, not just offensively were they, one of the top teams in the league, but they were really a shutdown team. They, like, whether it's Draisaitl and McDavid magic or what it was, I mean, you couldn't. Gaudreau was skating a different direction. Tkachuk was in no man's land, and McDavid was in the slot, about as open as McDavid ever gets. To me, that was a highlight reel, because only McDavid puts it in the right spot for the game winner in that type of a clutch situation. But he certainly scored a lot nicer goals than that and worked a lot harder for them. But that one just struck me as, maybe it was a defeated team in Calgary. I don't know.
He's definitely scored nicer goals. Like, that won't end up on one of the top 10 highlight goals of his career. But in terms of the importance of the goal, to a goal that gets his team to the Final Four, I mean, in that aspect, it's more important than any other goal he ever scored. I mean, he's hit 43 times in the NHL. He's absolutely dangled some defensemen and goaltenders and scored some gorgeous end-to-end rush goals. But just to get this team over the hump and put them into the conference final, something that he had not done in his 7-year NHL career, from that aspect, you have to put this at the top in terms of importance.
Well, and there's only 10% of the players in the league that can score that goal at that time. I mean, granted, like I said, he was open, he's in the slot, he had a clean shot, but we're talking such a clutch moment to put that puck exactly where he needs to put it. And just be there, right? Like, just know that Draisaitl is going to get it to him, and get the shot. You got the shot off really quick. It's in the right spot, and while we, as Oilers fans, we had a good chance to make fun of Markstrom. Markstrom was a Vezina candidate this year, and beating Markstrom, from up in the slot like that's not necessarily that easy. And McDavid got it done at maybe the hardest. That's why I say maybe 10%. Most players, I'd say, put that right in the breadbasket. Not him. Not at that time.
And if you look at all the training that he's done in his life, like McDavid's really done a lot of skill training with that PEP program out in Toronto, and just the way that he was able to do a backwards crossover to get himself into that shooting position. It just shows how phenomenal his skills are. Draisaitl just had to make that little quick pass. Connor was at the top of the circle when he received it, and he was skating backwards at the time. But because his first step is so much quicker than everyone else, and that he's able to accelerate from a backwards stance into a shooting position, that caught the goaltender off guard a little bit. And then obviously he has such a quick release that he put it in a perfect spot, post and in the back of the net. You couldn't have drawn it up any better.
Oh yeah, absolutely not. And the two guys that to get it done, I mean, they've been getting it done for so long in Edmonton, but now at this point in their career, at this point in the playoffs, it just, hey, I mean, I couldn't be more excited. I'm certain it's the same for every Oilers fan. And but we always knew what we had, right? I mean, I feel like this is the playoffs where people really are. I mean, if they noticed McDavid before, but I always feel like they were trying to unseat him somehow, right? Like say, it could be player X is better than McDavid or otherwise. And Draisaitl, same thing. But I think this is their playoffs to shine.
Right. And McDavid's overtime goal also extended his point streak in the playoffs to 8 games and gave him a league-leading 26 points in just 12 games. I mean, he's averaging over 2 points per game in the playoffs, Michael. And he was also just 1 point shy of tying Wayne Gretzky's NHL record for most consecutive multi-point games in a playoff year. He became only the 4th player in NHL history to record 7 straight in Game 4 against the Flames. But even though he's producing offense at a historic rate in the playoffs, I don't think he cares about his numbers at all. He's just driven to win, and the only thing he cares about is bringing the Stanley Cup back to Edmonton this year.
I couldn't agree more. He's at a whole different level, and I think there's a lot of factors going into that, but I do feel like this is a part of his game that we started to see with about a month left in the season. Like I'd been saying it about a month left in the season that we're starting to see playoff McDavid, and I don't think we ever have. I don't think we've seen him elevate to the we know. I know we haven't because we haven't seen this in 30 years, right? So
if you go back and look at the final 25 games of each of his seasons in the NHL, that's the most productive period of his season year after year. His numbers just always go up down the stretch. The best that he ever produced was last season during the pandemic shortened year, where he had, I think, 52 points in the final 25 games. Once again, averaging over 2 points per game, at that big of a time frame. I mean, we're talking about having 2 points per game in 12 games in the playoffs. Now, double that length of time last season, but this season he still did take his game up another notch, and it wasn't just the offense either. It's the other parts of his game that were shining through as well. I mean, he's become a more physical player, a more defensively committed player. He's gotten better on faceoffs. So it's not that he just raised his game offensively. He's raised all facets of his game.
Yeah. He really has. I mean, he's just been phenomenal. What's his plus minus for the I mean, I'm not a big plus minus. That's plus 16,
I think. Is it plus 19? Okay. Yeah.
Which is, ridiculous considering, I mean, that was a big deal. I'm not a huge fan of the stat, but, on occasion, if it fits my narrative, I'm happy to use it.
There you go.
And in this case, I mean, you look at Gaudreau, who was a -3 for the playoffs, and McDavid, who was plus 19.
I mean, he's on the ice for more goals for than he is against, right? Yeah. Significantly more. And even though multiple Flames players and their coach, Darryl Sutter, said that they got beat by one guy, that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, McDavid is the best player, but the Oilers have far more talent than they typically get credit for. And Leon Draisaitl has matched McDavid step for step in the playoffs this year. I mean, he tallied 4 assists in the Game 5 victory, his second 4-assist game of the series. What can you say about Draisaitl's performance in the Battle of Alberta?
I like it. Is this not the biggest overlooked performance that anybody's ever like I feel genuinely I know Draisaitl, I don't think he cares, if I'm being honest. But the first year he scored 50 goals, I felt like the following season he was the least talked about 50 goal scorer probably in the history of 50-goal scorers. And
even this year, it seemed like when he hit 50 goals, it was just like a footnote compared to when Matthews hit the milestone.
I know.
And they were within a week of each other too. And to have these two big moments, and yet one is getting so much more publicity than the other. And I understand that a Leafs player hadn't scored 50 goals in a long time, and that it is Toronto, so there's going to be some extra attention given there anyway. But I just felt that Draisaitl was really undervalued there in terms of what a great season he had.
Yeah, 100%. He just, he sits there, and we're not talking like Rob Lowe type of stuff. Rob Brown, sorry, where Rob Lowe.
Well, Rob Lowe was
about him either. But we're not talking
he
about
did play a hockey player in a movie.
That's right. That's right. But we're not talking about a guy that sat and just sort of shot the pucks in the net from a Lemieux pass, right? We're talking about a guy that drives his own line when he needs to, a guy that's out there, making the primary assists when he needs to, a guy that was on the boards in overtime and does what everybody knows he's already going to do, which is, circle away and still gets it done time after time after time. And we know he's injured. We know he's playing injured. He just goes out there and he gets it done. And when he's not injured, he's also one of the best face-off guys. He's batting pucks out of the air. The only thing he doesn't do that McDavid does is fly down the ice on the wing. And
he's got good straight line speed.
He does, but he does.
His hands are
not
enough.
As flashy as McDavid.
No, and his hands are good enough that he can still turn a defenseman inside out. But the difference is that Connor will always try to beat the defenseman wide and then cut towards the net for a glorious scoring chance. Whereas Draisaitl will slow down a bit after he crosses the blue line and then make that one really nice move to get past him. They're just they're not the same player. They're different, but they dominate nonetheless in their own way.
The players recognized both of them this year in the survey, and to me, that's probably what matters most if I'm a player. Is looked at my peers, the folks that play against me, they understand just how good I am. And Draisaitl being recognized as the best passer in the league for a guy that scores 55 goals. I mean, what can you say?
Exactly. I mean, Draisaitl is a former MVP and scoring champion, and in my opinion, he's the second best player in the NHL. But because he plays on the same team as McDavid, I don't know if he'll ever truly get the recognition he deserves, because the attention is almost always on McDavid, and rightfully so, I guess. But still, Draisaitl is a phenomenal player in his own right. Oilers fans watch this guy play 80 times a year. We know how great he is. I mean, his hockey sense, his vision, his passing skills on both sides of the blade are all elite. He has a deadly one-timer from the right circle on the power play. And just look at the numbers he's put up in this series. Like, he's 17 points in 5 games. I mean, those are prime Gretzky level numbers from the mid 80s. And the fact that he's dominating to this degree while playing with an ankle injury, it just speaks to how special of a player he is. And McDavid's been the most valuable player in the playoffs so far, but Draisaitl was the most valuable player of the series, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you can't, and it's hard to argue that. And I think that the only reason we're not saying that is just like you said, because he's in the shadow of McDavid. I mean, all you've heard, right, is McDavid versus McKinnon.
Yeah, and the other thing is, just look at Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. They were sort of the last generation's version of McDavid and Draisaitl, or you could say McDavid and Draisaitl are the new version of Crosby and Malkin, whichever way you want to look at it. But I don't know if Evgeny Malkin has ever got the respect he deserves either. I mean, in 2017, when they did that 100 greatest players of all time, he didn't even make that list. Meanwhile, Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane made it on. And some of that might be the bias of they were winning Stanley Cups at the time. Chicago's a big market in the United States. Patrick Kane is a big name American player. But Evgeny Malkin has been so overlooked throughout his career. In 2009, when the Penguins won their first cup, it was talked about as Crosby's first cup, but people forget Malkin won the Conn Smythe Trophy that year. He was the best player in the playoffs. He's won 2 scoring titles and 2 MVPs, and he's just almost always viewed as Crosby's sidekick. And now the dynamic duo of McDavid and Draisaitl, it seems to be sort of the same way. Draisaitl, like I said, I think he's the second best player in the league, but because he plays in McDavid's shadow, he's never really been viewed as that type of player, I think, around the league.
Yeah, and when you played with Gretzky, it was very much the same thing. There were a lot of great players out there that never got recognized until after the fact, or they went on and did their own thing, or Gretzky left and Messier led the team.
Well, I think Messier was appreciated when he was in Edmonton. Like, the numbers spoke for themselves, the way that he was such a physical beast and a competitor out there, but his legend really seemed to grow once he got to Manhattan and was with the star of the New York Rangers.
Yeah, and you never know. I mean, it might be a change sometime in the future, in the tail end of their careers. When maybe or maybe not the two players aren't playing together at some point, and of course we all hope that
I'm hoping
live and
that
die an Oiler, but
start to finish Oilers.
Yeah, and they could be. I mean, these guys are. They're clearly super close, and that's part of the joy of it, right? We are. This is our dynasty years. We're not. I don't know that we're in dynasty territory for the Oilers, because we still have to win a cup in that. But this is very much like back in the day. Seeing some of these players, there's some pieces that obviously I think are still needed on the team, but to have 2 absolute superstars and one guy who in McDavid, who, I think we can all agree is one of the best to ever play the game.
Yeah, and maybe glory years is the better way to describe it. And it's often talked that way about the 80s team as well. I don't know if we're going to ever see another dynasty in the NHL. I mean, Tampa Bay could be one. Yeah. If they win 3 straight this year, they are a dynasty for sure.
Yeah.
You could even say by modern standards, winning back-to-back is as close to a dynasty as we've seen in the last 10 years. Pittsburgh did it as well, but it's very difficult to do in the salary cap era. But just these are the prime years for McDavid and Draisaitl. When we look back on this team 10, 15 years from now, these are the years that we're going to remember. And it does still excite me when I see how impactful of players Crosby and Ovechkin are in their mid-30s, because I believe that McDavid will still be able to be a force when he's that age as well. But he might not be putting up 120, 130 points at 35. Maybe he's only a 100-point scorer by that time. But that will still put him, he'll still be a top 10, maybe even top 5 player in the league. So it's not like he's going to turn 30 and his game's going to fall off. He's still going to be one of the best players in the league. But this is the time when he's so much better than everybody else in the league. And you want to capitalize on that and win a couple championships while he's at this level.
Well, and people will always think that, these guys were born into superstardom. But the difference between McDavid and anybody else is how hard they work, right? That really their focus, their determination, their competitive level, a lot of it's mental, and having the athletic ability needs to obviously be there, but they work, 10 times harder than anybody else to be at the level they're at. And that's how I think a guy like McDavid, if he slows down when he gets in his 30s, I really feel like he's that committed to the game that he will change his game so that he continues to be the top player in the league, or a top player in the league. And that's just who Connor McDavid is. He'll, look at Draisaitl. right?
Yeah.
He's playing on one leg. He's changed his game a little bit in these playoffs, obviously.
I do think he's getting closer to back to full health. I don't think he's there yet, but he looks a little bit more dynamic skating with the puck than he did, let's say, in game 1 or 2. The other thing with Connor is just going back to the overtime goal he scored. One of the things that I think makes that goal even more special for him is everything that he's been through in the last 7 years. The Oilers have made the playoffs 4 out of those 7 years, but he hasn't really experienced much team success. It's been a lot of early exits. And the other thing is he's endured some pretty devastating injuries. I mean, he missed half of his rookie season with a broken collarbone. There was the torn MCL at the end of the 2018-19 season, a game that you and I were both at, and took him 6 months to recover from. Mm-hmm. When you think about all the hours of work that he put in to get just back to playing, for him to score that goal, it must have felt like nothing he's ever experienced before to just have this team success that he hasn't seen through the first 6 years of his career to finally get to this point where, everything's starting to go right. And now they actually have a chance to go to the Stanley Cup final if they can get past the Avs.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's definitely done it. Here's my thought on it though. Like, and you and I have had these arguments. I really felt like Tippett held this team back, and I feel like we're seeing it now more than we've ever seen it. Like, I think that this team is always been the team we're seeing, but just look at McDavid. Look at the videos you're watching of him after the game, and in Game 7, the post game interview on the ice, and this is a McDavid we haven't seen before. Like, we're not talking just the on ice, the way he plays, but we're starting to see emotion out of this guy. We're starting to see smiles. We're starting to like he was almost in tears after Game 7, right? The way he was talking, and we're seeing
it just shows how much he wants to win.
Yeah, and
how happy he is to be a part of this group.
I think that starts from the top, and that starts from a guy that's not, he understands the business aspect of the game, but Woodcroft, just the way he speaks, the way he talks to the players, about the players, to me, these guys are having fun. And I think that's part of it. I think they're still a young team. They want to go, these guys are still young and in their prime, right? And they want to go all the way. I've never seen them look this way. And this is a culture thing. And some of it is additions. The additions of Hyman, yes, I think sure helps. But those guys were there earlier in the season. I just don't think we've seen this team smile like this. And it might not seem like a big deal, but I think it is a big deal.
It is. And I just want to say quickly, I think that in 2019, Dave Tippett was the right coach for this team. I believe that they needed a veteran bench boss who could get them headed in the right direction again. He fixed the penalty kill. He got them playing with more structure, and he guided them to the playoffs in 2019-20 for the first time in 3 years. Yeah. But I think that he had taken this group as far as he could, and that by the midway point of this season, it was pretty evident that a change needed to be made. And of course, it was the perfect timing for Jay Woodcroft to come up. He made a seamless transition because he's so familiar with most of the roster. And I love the way that he approaches the game. I mean, even after the Oilers beat the Flames, and if you remember, he did this after they knocked off the Kings as well. Before he starts answering any hockey questions, he starts by thanking the opponent for the series, acknowledging them for how hard they played, and just giving credit to the other organization. We don't normally see that from coaches in their post-game pressers. And I don't know. I just think that he is the right coach for this group at this time. He's a young, innovative thinker, and this is the perfect guy to be leading the Connor McDavid Oilers.
Yeah, there's not a coach. As I think about it, there's not a coach in the league that's like him, right? And I thought kind of the most interesting thing was Sutter on the other side going 11-7.
Well,
like this is.
I think he's copying Jay.
yeah. I mean, these are things that like not a lot of coaches have gone 11-7, but it's Jay's thing, right? And
there's reasons for it too, though. I think
there were,
I think that if he had the 6 defensemen healthy that he wanted out there, that they would go in that direction. But because his fourth line wasn't playing very much, it gives him an opportunity to have an extra defenseman in there, especially when Darnell Nurse is dealing with some type of injury too. I mean, having a 7th defenseman can take some of the load off him. And it also allows you to double shift McDavid and Draisaitl with the fourth line anytime you want to. And at this time of year, if you're in a tight game and you're able to do that, then getting them out there as much as possible is a huge benefit to you, and obviously gives you a better chance to win. And then on the opposite side of it, if you have a big lead, like they had earlier in the series, you can kind of dial back their minutes and sort of give them more of the third period off, because you know that at some point they're going to have to play a lot in the next round. Yeah,
absolutely, and it's brilliant in its own way. And it's done the job. And what it takes, though, is the type of coach that knows how to put the right people out at the right times, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so many different factors that go into playing time in that instance that But here's the thing: I think this is worth talking about, because you brought up Darnell Nurse playing injured. He is definitely injured. Like, we watch Draisaitl. Sometimes it's hard to tell just how injured he is, right?
They're saying it's a core muscle injury.
Yeah.
And you're right. Draisaitl can overcome it maybe a little easier than most players could.
Nurse is clearly not as fast as he normally is.
I mean, when he's healthy, he's one of the best skating defensemen in the league.
Exactly.
But, we're not seeing that as much as of late.
And we haven't talked about it. I haven't heard it talked about much. I think he's played pretty damn good for a guy.
He scored a big goal last night to get the Oilers back in the game.
Exactly. And
he's not as physical as he usually is either.
Yeah. But he's played he's played well positionally, and he's done the job that he has to do in order to stay in the lineup and still be productive, despite limitations, which are clear. Like we've seen him almost be caught on the backward, going back, right? Like where guys were going to fly by him. It does scare me a little bit going into the Avs series, because not having his speed in that series, I think, it's always a detriment, but he's done so well to overcome it. I think he deserves more credit than I've heard him get. Not that I've heard people talking negative. Just not a lot of people have talked about him.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. The Avs have a very fast team, and the Oilers are going to be pressured hard going up against them. So if Darnell Nurse is anything less than 100%, which he won't be at full health in this series, it's going to hurt their chances. But they have to just find a way to counter that. And the Oilers have a good amount of team speed too, and they have to attack them just as hard as the Avs are going to bring it to the Oilers.
Are you at all surprised by, speaking of this, like Duncan Keith has taken up a ton of the load?
When they traded for him last summer, this is when you wanted Keith to step up. They didn't get him for the regular season. They got him for the playoffs, because this is a guy who's been on, I think, 6 deep playoff runs in his career. And to go to the conference final is nothing new for him. So he's used to these moments. And we just have to hope that he still can take his game up even another notch. And there's going to be the odd time where he still does get beat wide, or, a defenseman, or an opposing forward might kind of get the better of him in the corners or something. But, he's not the player he was at 30. He's 38 now. But there's still that veteran savvy there, and the good decisions with the puck that you feel so comfortable having him out there at any time of the game. And I like him with Evan Bouchard because I think he's been a great mentor for him. I mean, there's a 16-year age difference. That's got to be the biggest difference in age between D partners in the entire league. But it's clicked. It's worked well for them, and I think that he was a real positive factor for the Oilers in the series against Calgary.
Yeah, and people are starting to. I've listened to the analysts around the league. They're starting to say that Edmonton has a better defensive game than you realize. Like, they're starting to take note. Right?
And I think Dave Manson deserves a lot of credit for that too. I mean, he's done wonders with our prospects down in Bakersfield. And at age 55, this is the first opportunity that he's had to coach in the NHL. And so far, it looks like he's just continued to pick up right where he left off down there and get these guys headed in the right direction. And that's another guy who played a multitude of roles throughout his NHL career, from a rougher, tougher defenseman to a power play quarterback, defensive guy, whatever they needed him to do. And I think that he's able to impart a lot of wisdom on these younger defensemen on the Oilers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's he's definitely made some changes. Of course, now he's going up against his son.
Yeah,
that should be exciting. I mean, that's pretty neat. That doesn't happen all the time. And he's done wonders with the defense, to the point where, there's nobody, even including Tyson Barrie, who hasn't been known for his defensive play.
I think he's looked a lot better in this series.
He's looked great, I thought. Like, I mean, he's still in my mind a third pairing defenseman, but I used to cringe when I'd see him in the defensive zone and get worried, about how he'd play. And he's coming up with the puck. He's making good outs. He's doing the things that you want to see Tyson Barrie do. And he's doing it not just on the offensive zone anymore. He
has a unique role on the team where he's a third pairing guy at even strength, but he's the power play quarterback. He's a specialist, right? And you get him out there when you need him, and that offensive ability that he has. I mean, this is a guy who led the league in points by a defenseman last season. Mm-hmm. So obviously there's a lot of offense in his game. When you can get that guy out there and have him running on the power play with guys like McDavid and Draisaitl and Nugent Hopkins, there's an opportunity to do damage. But you want to make sure that you don't give him the toughest defensive minutes at 5-on-5 and have him trying to defend against the other team's top attackers.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they've done that well. I feel like the line matchups, everything about the coaching staff, they're putting people in the right place to be successful. And I think that's what, that's the only way you get out of. Look, going into this series, I had Edmonton winning in 7 as well. But if Calgary had come out on top, to be fair, I don't know that I would have been surprised by it. Right? Like, I did have Edmonton winning, but I would have, Calgary, over the course of the regular season, and they looked like a big team, the kind of team built for playoffs. Edmonton had an answer for them. And part of it, to me, and part of the reason why nobody kind of gave Edmonton the credit that they deserved, maybe even including some Oilers fans gave them the credit, is because of that stretch in the middle of the season that they looked awful, and people didn't quite trust this team yet.
No.
And now they're starting to trust the team. But you go into this round, we're still, Edmonton's still the underdog.
Oh, they're even a bigger underdog than they were against Calgary. And just going back to Woodcroft for a second, like, you're right. He does find a way to put everyone in a position to succeed. And he's just, from the start, shown an ability to foster a positive culture for the players with an expectation of winning. And they've won a lot more than they've lost since he came back to Edmonton. He did make an interesting decision last game to break up the best line in hockey at the start of the second period when Woodcroft took Evander Kane off the top line and moved up Zach Hyman. Were you surprised that Woodcroft made that switch after how dominant the trio have been in the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, there are things that Woodcroft has done, since he started with the Oilers that, I've questioned until after the game where I think, man, like he's
You're like, oh, that worked again.
Yeah, he's a brilliant tactician, and he's thinking, 3 steps ahead of me, because that the change with Hyman, and look, if anybody deserved it, Hyman deserved it, right? And if you're going to, you want to put away a team and you want to load up a line. I mean, Hyman scored in every goal in the series, every game in the series.
Yeah.
And he, he's exactly the depth scoring this team has needed for a long time. And I like, it's hard not to love the guy. He gives 110% every shift, and he's making stuff happen, whether it's, a 5-on-5 or shorthanded. I mean, he's as much a danger to score shorthanded, as the Flames know, as he is on 5-on-5.
Yeah.
Like, and he had a breakaway too. Was it the other night or the game prior? But it was the other night, yeah. And he didn't score, but I mean,
Well, I mean, even in the game when he scored the game-winning goal on a breakaway in Game 2, he actually had another breakaway earlier in that game when he was stopped. So, he's that's one of the things I didn't know about him when he came to Edmonton, is how good of a skater he was, and he's really impressed me, because that wasn't really on the scouting report when we were hearing about Zach Hyman.
Yeah, and I've heard. I mean, Man, sometimes I listen to analysts around the league, and it just gets me frustrated that I feel like they don't watch enough Oilers games.
There's factors here, right? I mean, smaller Western Canadian city, not a big name market. The fact that the games start later there, and they just try to catch the highlights in the morning. But you'd think with the 2 best players in the league that some people out east would stay up or pay a little more attention to what's going on in Edmonton.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And so to my point, listening to NHL radio today, one commentator, and I won't say who, was suggesting that they would love to have Hyman's job and just tap in goals. From McDavid and Draisaitl on the power play. I mean, he hasn't done that all year, and he scored shorthanded, and and. I mean, you haven't watched Hyman if that's what you think he does.
Well, he scored 2 goals in the crease in this series, and those are the images that are probably freshest in their mind. So they just think that that's how most of his goals have been scored. But he's also come down the wing and ripped a couple past the goaltender as well.
And fighting out from behind the net, and scoring on Markstrom, big goal. Like, it's hard not to love the guy and love the the intensity in which he plays, what he brings to the culture of the team, right? And talking about I talked about culture before. I mean, it's just such a great thing to see. Like McDavid embracing Nugent Hopkins, and
that was a cool moment.
And his, talking about Puljujarvi, right? And there's just so many things, and I think you got guys like Hyman that are glue guys, right?
Yeah,
that always goes, a long ways.
And if your glue guys are offensive producers, that means even more. And the Oilers were only trailing 1-0 when Woodcroft decided to switch up his lines. But considering the fact that McDavid, Draisaitl, and Kane had combined for 62 points through the first 11 games of the playoffs this year.
That's so crazy to hear that.
I know, but I wouldn't have even thought about splitting that lineup. But Woodcroft must have seen something that he felt that he needed to change. And as we just talked about, most of his coaching decisions over the past 3 months have worked, and that change seemed to spark the Oilers' comeback in the second period. Zach Hyman was flying right from puck drop, and I think Woodcroft just saw an opportunity to elevate him in the lineup. And speaking of Hyman, he's been one of Edmonton's most important players in the series. He had 3 points in Game 5, and as you already said, he became the first player in Oilers history to score in each of the first 5 games of a playoff series. Michael, Hyman had an excellent regular season, but has he even exceeded your expectations in the playoffs so far?
Yeah, he has. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But not in the way that some players do. What he's done is what he's exceeded is the fact that he can play that way all the time, right? Like, there's a lot of players in this league that can play that way during the regular season. But when it comes to playoffs, which everybody knows is a whole different season, that game, disappears. True. And it's funny because he played for the Leafs, obviously, and we all know their first round woes. So you might think that that's not there, right? But clearly it might be the team, some mental pressure they're going through, whatever. He's bringing it. He's bringing it the way we know Zach Hyman can.
Yeah, and it is a different style of hockey, but I like that the Oilers really haven't changed the way they play. I mean, they're definitely more structured defensively since Woodcroft came in, but they still want to play their run and gun offensive hockey that they like to play. And I think Dash even had a quote tweet earlier today of what John Tortorella said back in the fall, saying that you're not talking about McDavid, saying you're not going to fill the net. You need to change the way you play to win in the playoffs. And McDavid's basically said, we're going to go out there and we're going to score a bunch of goals and we're going to win 5-4 or 5-3. We're going to run it up. We're not going to play this tight 2-1 hockey that everyone thinks that you have to play to win in the playoffs. That's not Oilers hockey.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I talked about this the other night in my post game with the guys, and it was that early on in the season, I had a lot of people come at me saying I was being toxic positivity was used a couple of times. And I'm an optimistic, positive guy myself, so I think it's always better to be overly positive than overly negative. I 100% agree, and I've had my times where I wouldn't say that I was super negative with this team, but I didn't think they were going to get it done or whichever. But early on in the season, I said many times that this was where and how this team was going to win, and it was going to be scoring 5 goals and Mike Smith playing a Grant Fuhr type of game, which is just don't let in that, 5th goal, right? Yeah, and he doesn't need to be a 1.5 goals against average. He needs to be 1 under whatever the other team is. And everybody said that's just not going to happen in the playoffs, but it is happening. This is how the Oilers are playing. And if they continue to have that mentality that they, which is, we need to win, and to win, you need to do it by one or more. They're going to do it. And as long as, I don't care if Mike Smith lets in a 150-foot goal, as long as he doesn't let in the one that matters. Yeah. Right. And that's, to me, that's a big deal.
Definitely. And you just look at the guys that they've surrounded McDavid and Draisaitl with. These are players who you feel like you can win with. I think this is the deepest roster that Edmonton has had, even despite that terrible stretch they had in the middle of the season when they went 2-11-2. I never thought they were as bad as that record was, and maybe they weren't quite as good as their 16-5 record to start the season either. But you look at what this team has done down the stretch, I think that that's closer to the real Oilers and shown that under Woodcroft with this group of players, they were a top 5 team in the league, and that should be the expectation. And right now they're in the conference final where they should be. They've played like a team that belonged to the conference final for the last 3 months. And just going back to Hyman, I mean, after watching him all winter, I felt confident that he was going to be an impact player for the Oilers in the playoffs. It's like you've mentioned, everyone says it about the guy. Like, he never takes a shift off. He just does a great job on the forecheck to retrieve pucks and extend possession time in the offensive zone. So, his line mates also really benefit from that gritty style of play as well. And he can beat goalies with his wrist shot, but he also goes hard to the net. He buries rebounds in the crease, which makes him a real asset on the power play. And his defensive play is outstanding as well. And the Oilers had the best 4 forwards in this series, at least. And if Hyman was the 4th among them, he was still better than every Flames forward in the series. And I think he was a key reason why they won in just 5 games.
Yeah, and no credit to that, right? Like,
no.
I mean, the Flames didn't want to give him any credit. The analysts, you barely talked about him. They did on the Sportsnet panel. I'll give him that. The Sportsnet panel, I thought, was, had some fair analysis of them. But outside of the guys that were staying up and watching the games, you didn't hear Hyman talked about much.
And at the same time, I'm happy that McDavid is getting the admiration that he deserves, because he is having a postseason for the ages, and this is his time. He should be the main focus. But if you think back to the 80s Oilers, that team was full of Hall of Famers. Those guys got talked about all the time as well. Jari Kurri, Paul Coffey, Mark Messier, Glenn Anderson, Grant Fuhr. This team doesn't have a ton of Hall of Famers, but they still have some really good hockey players. Draisaitl is probably headed to the Hall of Fame along with Connor McDavid, but Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is a fantastic hockey player. Zach Hyman is a fantastic hockey player. Evan Bouchard is taking another step forward in front of our very eyes and developing into a top 4, if not top 2 guy on the back end. Ryan McLeod, another young player, is continuing to just elevate his game at 22 years old. I mean, just go up and down the lineup. You can see so many guys who are just playing the best hockey of their lives, and it's all culminated with getting the Oilers to this point where they're going to play one of the best teams in the league in the conference final next week.
Yeah. I'm still, when you say that, I'm still in shock.
it hasn't fully set in that on Monday night the Oilers are going to be playing in Game 1 in Denver, or that the Oilers are going to be playing in June for the first time in 16 years. I mean, I know they did play in August a couple of years ago, but that was because of the bubble. I mean, this is legitimately making it to June hockey.
Yeah, and it's exciting. I posted a picture of myself in an Oilers jersey and sandals the other day.
I liked it with the foam finger.
Yeah, and it just, to be wearing sandals and cheering on the Oilers, man. I mean, I couldn't ask for anything more. And I'm loving the team. I'm loving what they're bringing night after night, and we'll all have moments during the games where we're questioning what a player does or how he does it. But at the end of the day, they've delivered on the one thing that I want them to deliver on year after year, and that's just to be competitive and to show us that, there's a chance. And while I'd probably be very disappointed if they don't go all the way, I'll still, to me, this has been a very successful season so far.
100%. And we do need to enjoy this, because conference finals don't come around all the time. But I don't want this to just be a one-off for this group. This should be the expectation now going forward, where you expect to come out of the Pacific Division and battle for a chance to go to the Stanley Cup year after year. It's probably not going to happen every single year. Like, Vegas is almost certainly going to be back next year better. The Flames, I don't know what their roster is going to look like, but they're probably not going to be pushovers. The Kings are slowly getting better. the Oilers are still going to have to fight to get to this point year after year. But now that we've had a taste of this, and that you're seeing McDavid and Draisaitl at their, peak performance to this point, you want to be going on deep playoff runs and competing for Stanley Cups in this window when they're both at this, like I said, peak ability for them. I just think that needs to become the norm for this group, where we don't say, okay, making it to the conference final is fine. Like, no, we need to be making it to the Stanley Cup final. We need to be winning Stanley Cups. This is the time to do it with these guys.
Yeah. And there were points this year, though, where I didn't think we'd even be at this stage.
No, I mean, the Oilers were sitting in 10th place in the conference at the end of January. So, I mean, this was far from a guarantee if you go back 5 months.
Yeah, it was. Well, there was a point at which I said the Oilers aren't going to make the playoffs this year.
I never did believe that. I always thought they were going to get in. So maybe the people who were saying that you were toxic positivity didn't listen to that episode.
Yeah, no, they missed that one. I was still being positive about the Oilers. But there was a point at which I was quite certain that we were going to have to write the year off. And I didn't at the time I was feeling a little bit down that, Tippett was still behind the bench and we were seeing this team kind of just continue this downward spiral.
Well,
it literally changed overnight. I mean, if you look at the stats, we were by win percentage, the third best team in the league in the regular season. Florida was tops, Calgary was second, and we were third. But those three teams were all over 750
from February 11th on, when he took over behind the bench. Yeah,
exactly.
And it makes you wonder where this team would have been if they would have made the coaching change, say, a month or a month and a half earlier.
Well, if you count the playoffs into that, we actually have, since he took over, the best winning percentage in the league. So,
that's awesome. I mean, and part of that is because one of the teams you knocked off was the team ahead of you. So that obviously helps as well. And the fact that Florida got swept doesn't hurt us either.
It doesn't hurt them.
But I mean, obviously that benefits us. But yeah, it's been pretty impressive to see. All right, let's talk about Mike Smith now. He stopped 32 out of 36 shots in the Game 5 victory, and Smith was able to shake off a rough outing in Game 1 where he was pulled after allowing 3 goals on 10 shots and responded with 4 straight wins. Michael, that wasn't Smith's best game of the series, but he was good enough to backstop the Oilers to the win, I should say, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah, and I keep saying it, that's exactly how Fuhr made a Hall of Fame career, right? And I'm not sure Mike Smith is in that same category, but
although he was wearing his Grant Fuhr mask in that game.
And he's channeled inner Grant Fuhr. I mean, he has made, all I've ever asked from the Oilers goaltending is that they make the saves when they need to make the saves, and he's done that. And you know what I love most, and I've been critical of Smith at many times in his career as an Oiler, but what I love the most about him is his ability to bounce back. I mean, you look, we all know about a guy that wasn't able to bounce back in Salo, right? I mean, once he let in the bad goal, he was never the same.
Right.
Mike Smith, on the other hand, he's done it a couple of times this playoffs, and he just continued to bounce back. I mean, he wouldn't sit there and while it looked like it looks like he's complaining about it. That's not him. What he does is he takes that and says, look, I let this one in. I'm not going to let the next one in. And as long as he continues to do it that way, this is not, if you take Vasilevsky out of the equation right now, this has not been a goaltender's playoffs. Like, this has been definitely quite a bit different. He leads, for instance, in shutouts right now with 2 over everybody. And if you look at the goals against average, and you take Binnington and Ottinger out, and Ranta, right? Everybody's over 2.0 2.0. Darcy Kemper's 2.44 goals against average, right? Mike Smith is 2.7, but he's right up there. I just think, he's done everything I would ask of him. I feel confident with him in net. I don't get that same feeling that, he's got an unorthodox style that always makes me a little bit nervous. But at the same time, there were times in the season where I was just scared when the other team took a shot. Now I don't have that same fear. I just believe now that he'll make the save that he needs to make.
Right. And I'm sort of on the same page as you. Like, one of the things that I love about Mike Smith is that nothing phases him. He had a very costly mistake in game 1 against the Kings, but he owned up to it and he moved on. He allowed a goal from over 130 feet away earlier this week in game 4, but he shook it off and closed out the series 2 nights later. And he posted an impressive .922 save percentage in those 4 wins over Calgary. Mm-hmm. And this was against a team with 340 goal scorers in the regular season. Michael, we know Smith is an intense competitor who doesn't need anything or anyone to light a fire under him. But do you think there was any added motivation for him to beat the Flames because they are his former team and because the Oilers heavily pursued the goalie at the other end of the ice, Jacob Markstrom, in free agency a couple of years ago?
Yeah, the players always sort of laugh that stuff off. But, if you ask any of the old Oilers, they hated the Flames. And once the rivalry kicked in and the fans were there, they hated them even more. I don't think it's unique to Smith. I think this whole team really wanted to beat the Flames. Like, I think they had something to prove. And the other, aspect to that is everybody was taking the Flames, including Wayne Gretzky's NHL bracket, right? And so, this is a team that knew they could compete with the best. And they just needed to show it, and they did it. And in fact, they beat LA. And what was everybody saying? Well, it was LA, right? Like, they're not immune. They hear all of these things. They're not deaf. They hear what's going on out there. And I think that they all had something to prove. But definitely for Mike Smith, I think he really has a hatred for that franchise. Like, it just is one of those things. And he's,
it goes back to his fight with Cam Talbot.
Exactly. Yeah.
In January of 2020.
We should, talk about like how happy he is to be an Oiler. Yeah. Like, I think there's a guy that really loves being an Edmonton Oiler player.
Well, the other thing is he's 40 years old. I know he's signed for next season, but he realizes that he probably doesn't have too many more kicks at the can to try and win a Stanley Cup. So he's going to take every opportunity he can to get that done this year. I mean, it was 10 years ago the last time he made it to the conference final with the Coyotes. That was at age 30. Here he is now at 40. And, who knows? Maybe this will be the last good shot that he'll have, because the Oilers could either have a new goaltender next season or he might be the backup. So you got to take advantage of this while you can and have a chance to backstop the Oilers to their first championship in more than 3 decades. I mean, he might just decide to call it a career if that happens. But I don't think Smith would ever come right out and say that he wanted to beat Markstrom because the Oilers tried to sign him in 2020. But I think he would want to prove it to himself and possibly the Oilers brass that they made the right decision bringing him back. And even though the Flames only got 5 pucks past him in Game 5, 4 were the only ones that counted. I want to go to the controversial goal with you now. Blake Coleman thought that he had the go-ahead goal with less than 4 minutes to play in regulation, but after video review, that goal was disallowed when it was determined that he kicked the puck into the net. Michael, this has been a very hot topic among hockey fans on Twitter over the last 48 hours. In your opinion, should the goal have counted?
Yeah, I'm going to give you everything I think about this goal right now, rather. And first, yes, I think it should have counted. I got no problem with any Flames fan who doesn't like the call. But here's in my mind, there's a whole bunch of things that are at play. The importance of that goal is far overvalued by Flames fans who were down 3-1 in a series in a game that still had 6 minutes left against a team that has been scoring 5 goals against Markstrom
and
since
had
the
made
beginning
multiple comebacks against
exactly.
This team.
Yeah. So, to say that was the momentum swinger in this series, is laughable. To compare it in any way, shape, or form, which I saw a certain Flames writer talk about comparing it to the Tampa Bay disallowed goal, is ridiculous. They're not even the least bit comparable. Now, as a Flames fan, you know what? I would say to any Flames fan, the Oilers had 2 goals disallowed in, was it Game 3? And they just came back and they continued to score, because that's what good teams do in the playoffs. They don't let, that doesn't define them, a disallowed goal. They continue to move on from it. And the Oilers were capable of doing that. Had it happened the other way, I have no doubt the Oilers would have just shook it off and gone and scored again anyway.
Yeah.
And so it's not like the Flames didn't have a chance to score after that and win the game. This was not the goal that tied the game. It was the goal that put them ahead. And so, all they needed to do was score one more to win the game. They weren't good enough to do it. And so to me, it's been talked about far too much. As I said, it was a 3-1 series, in a series that you saw the Oilers scored 25 goals in 5 games. It wasn't as close as Daryl Sutter and the Flames media would have you believe. The Oilers won this series, and it was fair and square. And to think that anybody would suggest that McDavid's getting calls hasn't watched enough McDavid.
No, not nearly enough. And look, Flames fans will say that the goal should have counted because Coleman didn't swing his foot back and kick the puck into the net. But the way that the NHL rulebook describes a kick is by a player propelling the puck forward with their foot. And Coleman definitely made sure that he directed that puck into the net when he crashed hard into Smith. The way that I looked at it, it was probably going to cross the line anyway. But he made sure, he gave it that little extra nudge when he was flying forward to make sure that puck got over the line. And like you said, even if the goal counted, there was no guarantee they win that game, let alone the series. I still believe that the Oilers would have won the series. If not that game, then the game that would have been played tonight, Game 6 back at Rogers Place. Calgary did surrender multiple leads on home ice in this series. There's no reason to think that they wouldn't do it again. And they simply couldn't stop the Oilers' big guns in this series. Edmonton was the better team, and they deserved to win.
Absolutely. And that's, to me, is the disappointing thing about it, is that there are seemingly some people who think that this, it was a momentum swinging goal. And I just, I can't see it that way. It was, the best team won the series, and it was a 50-50 call. Hey, if it had gone against the Oilers, I would have been upset. I was upset about the goal disallowed when Connor apparently interfered with Markstrom. I was upset about the whistle that went too early with Lee behind the net and looked like Hyman put the puck in the net. But the Oilers did what good teams do after those disallowed goals, is they went back and they scored some more.
Well, they tilted the ice. If you remember, the last 5 minutes of the third period, the Oilers had multiple chances to score. And you would have expected that the Flames would have used that disallowed goal as motivation. It was like the other way around. The Oilers, it was like a wake-up call for them, and they were the ones that got going and ultimately ended it early into the overtime period.
I when they were reviewing the goal, I thought it would go against the Oilers. I thought they would, automatically review the goal and that it would be considered a goal. And at the time, I put a tweet out. I said, "Just let's play some hockey." And I said, "Markstrom has 5 goals in him, right? He
has many other nights.
Yeah, we're going to come back and tie this up." I jokingly tweeted out after that, I'm a little bit upset that the goal was disallowed too, because Connor didn't have his chance at a multi-point game.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like he probably would have scored or assisted on the game tying goal and then scored the game winner in overtime.
To Gretzky's record.
Right? Yeah. So
at least tying it. But no, I mean, I just think getting that overtime goal, it's going to be one of the things we'll remember most from this season. The goal that sent them to the conference final, and the fact that Connor did it. I mean, you couldn't have picked a better guy to score that goal.
No.
But before we call it a night here, we've got something new and exciting at the Heavy Hockey Network, and I wanted to know if you would share that with us.
Yeah, we sure do. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. We've of course we've been doing a lot of different things at on the Heavy Hockey Network and just trying to be put out good content, whether it's your podcast or Straight Off the Pipe with Dursa and Dash and or my Oilerslive podcasts or the many different articles that you and Lotzi and everybody are writing. It's been a ton of fun, and of course, there's we just wanted to add in a little bit extra into there, and that's put up some nice new gear and stuff, and so in honor of the Oilers beating the Flames, we acquired the domain didtheflameslose.com. And also we also have heavyhockeygear.com, which is where you can go, and there will be we'll add to it, but right now there's some Battle of Alberta champions hats and shirts, and one guy hats or shirts and hats, and then probably the most popular thing right now actually is the Heavy Hockey flat bill cap. Is pretty popular. And then there's, some other things. HudsonBayRules.com also goes to the site where you can buy, if you're not familiar with Hudson Bay Rules, it was a term coined by Trent Yanni, who was behind the bench for the Oilers at one point. And it was in reference to how they played hockey in Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, which is no rules hockey. And so, I've always loved that phrase. And so Hudson Bay Rules is on there. Another popular shirt is the Summon the Bison shirt, in reference to Jesse Puljujarvi and kind of like a Batman type of theme. So some great stuff on there, and we're going to add more. I know you and all the guys are coming up with T-shirt ideas all the time, and we're just going to have some fun with it, and hopefully people will find something they like and or make a request. We'll probably put up some 99 Forever merch, I would imagine, shortly. And
that would be cool too.
Yeah.
All I can say is that everything I've seen on there before looks great. Anyone listening to the show, please go check that out. I'm sure you'll find something on there that you like. It's good quality stuff, and Michael does fantastic work for this podcast and devotes so much time. So please, go check everything out. The other thing that I wanted to quickly talk about before we sign off is Ben Stetler, who has been the Oilers' good luck charm throughout the regular season and into the playoffs this year. He celebrated his 6th birthday yesterday. I'm so glad that the Oilers were able to get the win for him in Calgary, to have him celebrate that birthday with a big victory over the Flames. Can I just get a thought from you on what he has meant to not only the players, the organization, but the city of Edmonton and hockey fans everywhere?
Yeah, you know what? I remember when his dad Mike put the first video up of Ben as just this young, little boy putting the puck in the fun net at home, and who wanted to meet his hero, and
I love that video.
And he's going through just starting his journey, and what an incredible and difficult journey this young guy's going through. There's just so much. I mean, he's I think he's inspiring to everybody, and if you got to have the hardest heart not to be inspired by him. And I just love that, he's the embodiment of every Oilers fan, right? Like, we're just there, cheering on our team, but he does it with a smile on his face despite what he's going through, and I think we all love hearing his play La Bamba, baby, and the way he says it and how cute it sounds and everything about it. I don't know if you're aware, but they're doing a little cancer donation, and you get an entry to win a Connor McDavid and a Ben Stelter signed Heroic Inspirations card by Upper Deck.
Oh, that's awesome.
And there's if you just go onto his dad, Mike Stelter's Twitter, you can find it. But it's been outstanding. This team has so much to play for, whether it's Joey Moss, Ben Stelter, Cave. It's I think I'm missing some people there, but there's lots for this team to play for, and he's just one of them. But what an inspiration!
Absolutely. I mean, no one should have to go through what he has experienced, let alone someone at such a young age, and to see all the things that he's been able to do over the past couple months, like stand on the blue line with his hero Connor McDavid in full Oilers gear, get to go to a morning skate with them and score a goal on Mikko Koskinen, get his own Upper Deck card. Just have the McDavid and Draisaitl came over to his house and brought their dogs. Mm-hmm. If you go check out, like you said, his dad's Twitter account, Mike Stelter, he's been tweeting lots of pictures and videos. There's a great one of Ben's 6th birthday with a Mickey Mouse birthday cake, wearing an Oilers jersey that Teresa's Cake, made for him. It's just, he really is such a positive thing for this city right now. And like you said, everyone from Colby Cave to Joey Moss to Ben Stelter, there's no shortage of people to play for, as well as each other. And I can just picture, if the Oilers won the Stanley Cup this year, having him on the ice for that celebration would just be a phenomenal moment. And I hope we get to see that.
Well, and I'm not just saying this, there'd be tears in my eyes if it happens, just to watch that, because I've had friends lose some young children to various kids' cancers, and it's heartbreaking to see. But not that those kids weren't fighting. The fact that these kids do this, the hardest journey they'll ever take, but they do it with a smile on their face, is so inspiring. Like, he's just to watch him laugh and smile and cheer this team on is, man, it gets you right.
I went to game 1 between the Oilers and the Kings, a game that Ben wasn't able to attend because he was in Disneyland with his family. But in the intro package that the Oilers had up on the Jumbotron, the biggest ovation that happened, even bigger than when they introduced Connor McDavid in the opening lineup, was when Ben's face was shown up on the Jumbotron saying, "Play La Bamba, baby." The entire building erupted. So it just shows you there isn't an Oilers fan out there who isn't aware of this kid and what he means to the team. And I just wanted to take a little bit of time here at the end of the show to acknowledge him and say, keep fighting, Ben. We're all pulling for you, and we hope you had a great birthday.
Yeah. No, it's a good thing that you did. Glad you did.
All right, Michael. Well, I appreciate you being back on the show. I'm sure that I'll have you back sometime soon, and whenever you need me to be a guest on your show, I'll be there as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, the invite is always there, and I think Dash is slowly creeping in on your record if he hasn't passed it. But I always love having you on the show.
I'm going to track down our exact number sometime. and thank you again. I mean, it's always great talking hockey with you. Let's before we say goodnight, I want to get your prediction. How many games and who wins the Western Conference Final?
Yeah, well, I got to continue to go for the Oilers, and I'm going to go in 6.
I'm going to say Oilers in 7.
Right on.
I think they're going to be pushed by a very talented Avs team. But
Colorado's outstanding.
But I just think that this team is destined for something great this year.
I agree.
All right, Michael. Thanks again. Have a good night.
You too.
So for Michael Hebert, I'm Eric Friesen. This has been the 99 Forever podcast. We're out.